video, we're going to do some operations with complex numbers. So let's take a look at the first problem. So this problem is addition. Please notice this is not multiplication, it is addition. It has a plus sign between them. So just like every other problem you've ever done that contains variables, this problem is not concerned with what the value of I is. We are just combining like terms. So I have an 11 plus 2 is 13. A negative 7 plus a negative 5 is a negative 12i. And that's it. So we're just simply combining like terms. Okay? Again, this is subtraction. Okay, this is not multiplication. The one thing that's going to get you on this problem is not distributing that negative to both terms. So it's very beneficial to go ahead and distribute the negative. So I'm going to do negative 3 plus 8i. And then a negative times positive 1 is negative 1. A negative times positive 8i is negative 8i. Now I'm ready to combine like terms. So I'm going to have a negative 3 and a negative 1 is a negative 4. And a positive 8i and a negative 8i goes to 0. So my answer is just a negative 4. Okay? Alright, so this is just regular distributive property. I have a number. There's no operator here that lets me know that's multiplication, so I'm just going to distribute across. So I have negative 5i times negative 2 is a positive 10i. A negative 5i times a negative I is a positive 5i squared. Now remember here we have to simplify that I squared. We know that the value of I squared is equal to negative 1. So I have times. I'm simply replacing I squared with negative 1. Now we have to remember that complex numbers have to be in the form a plus bi. So I'm going to put my negative 5 first plus 10i. And that is my final answer. Okay? So next we have multiplication again. So we have a binomial times a binomial. So I'm going to have 7 times 4 is 28. 7 times 3i is positive 21i. I times 4 is 4i. And I times 3i is positive 3i squared. So in this next step, I'm going to combine my like terms and replace my I squared with negative 1. Okay, so I'm going to have 28. Positive 21i plus 4i is a positive 25i plus 3 times negative 1. So I've replaced my I squared with negative 1. So I have 28. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3 plus 25i. 28 minus 3 is 25 minus plus 25i. Okay? Next problem, again, this is just distributive property, a binomial times a binomial. Something that I do want you to notice is that these are conjugate pairs. I have a positive 3, 5i, and a 5i, but my center sign is opposite, which makes them conjugate pairs. So I'm going to do my distributive property. So when we do this, we expect something very special to happen. So we have 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times negative 5i is negative 15i. Then I have 5i times 3 is positive 15i. And 5i times negative 5i is negative 25i squared. So again, I'm going to combine my like terms and replace my I squared in one step. So I have 9. Now this is what should happen every time you multiply two conjugate pairs. That center term is going to disappear. So I have a negative 15i plus 15i, which goes to 0. So then I have minus 25. I squared is going to be replaced with negative 1. So then I'm going to have 9. A negative 25 and a negative 1 make a positive 25. And 9 plus 25 is 34. So this is just an order of operations problem, so we need to take care of the exponents first. So I'm going to have 5 minus 2i, 2 plus 7i, minus 2i times, remember expanded property, this says that we have to raise everything within the parentheses to the second power. So that's 3 squared is 9, and I squared is, of course, I squared. Then order of operations says that we're going to do multiplication next from left to right. So I'm going to multiply these two binomials here first. So I have 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 7i is positive 35i. Negative 2i times 2 is minus 4i. And negative 2 times 7 is negative 14i squared. Then everything else in the problem, I'm going to leave it as is. So then next we're going to do the multiplication here from left to right. So I have 10 plus 35i minus 4i minus 14i squared minus 2 times 9 is 18, and I times I squared is I cubed. Okay, so now I'm going to combine like terms, and I'm going to replace my I squared and reduce this I cubed. So I have 10. 35i minus 4i is 31i minus 14 times negative 1 minus 18 times I squared times I. So again, I'm going to do a little simplification here and replace my I squared. So I have 10 plus 31i plus 14 minus 18 times negative 1 times I. So I'm going to combine like terms and simplify again. 10 plus 14 is 24 plus 31i. Negative 18 times negative 1 is positive 18 times I is positive 18i. Then lastly, I'm going to combine my two I terms, and I have 24 plus 49i. Okay? So the next thing is rationalizing the denominator. Remember that when we have an I in the bottom, we cannot leave it there. So if I have just an I can get rid of that by multiplying top and bottom by I. Remember, this is a legal math move because anything over itself is simply 1, and multiplying something by 1 doesn't change it. So I have negative 4 times I is negative 4i. 7i times I is 7i squared. So then I can replace my I squared with negative 1. So I have 7 times negative 1. So I'm going to have negative 4i over negative 7. Two negatives make a positive, so I have 4 over 7i. Okay? Next, it's the same thing. I just have a binomial in the top. The process does not change, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by I. So I have 8 times I is 8i. 4i times I is positive 4i squared. All over 2i times I is 2i squared. So again, I'm going to replace my I squareds with negative 1. So I have 8i plus 4 times negative 1 over 2 times negative 1. Okay? So I know that my numbers have to come first in my a plus bi form. So I'm going to have negative 4 plus 8i over negative 2. So remember, we have to be in that a plus bi form. So I'm going to make sure that when I break this apart, I'm going to have negative 4 over negative 2 plus 8 over negative 2i. And then I'm going to simplify. Negative 4 divided by negative 2 is 2. Positive 8 divided by negative 2 is negative 4i. Okay? And that's my final answer. Again, I'm going to multiply by a factor of I. Now, if you notice that all of these are divisible by 5, that is a legal first move, but I just want to keep the process rolling in the same way. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by I. So I have negative 35 times I is negative 35i. Negative 15i times I is negative 15i squared. All over 5i times I is 5i squared. So again, I'm going to replace my I squareds with negative 1. So I have negative 35i minus 15 times negative 1 over 5 times negative 1. So I'm going to simplify. I'm going to bring my number to the front, my imaginary part to the back for my a plus bi form. So a negative 15 and negative 1 is 15 minus 35i all over negative 5. So I'm going to break it apart to get in that a plus bi form. So I have 15 over negative 5 minus 35 over negative 5i. 15 divided by a negative 5 is a negative 3. Two negatives make a positive, and 35 divided by 5 is 7. So I have negative 3 plus 7i as my final answer. Okay? Now, I don't have just a single I in the denominator. I have a binomial. To get rid of a binomial, I have to multiply by the conjugate. Okay? So I'm going to do 1 plus I. That is the conjugate. So I have 6i times 1 is 6i. 6i times I is 6i squared over 1 times 1 is 1, positive I, negative I, and minus I squared. Okay? So again, I'm going to combine like terms and replace my I squareds with negative 1. So I have 6i plus 6 times negative 1 all over 1 minus negative 1. So again, to make sure I'm in that a plus bi form, I'm going to bring my constant to the front, the real part of my complex to the front. So I have negative 6 plus 6i. 1 minus a negative 1 is 2. So again, my goal is that a plus bi form. So I'm going to have negative 6 over 2 plus 6 over 2i. And I'm going to simplify. So I have negative 3 plus 3i. And that is my final answer. So again, I have that binomial on the bottom. So I'm going to multiply by the conjugate. So that's 3 minus I, top and bottom. So I have 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times negative I is negative 4i. 10i times 3 is 30i. 10i times negative I is negative 10i squared. All over. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times negative I times 3, I times negative I. Okay? So I'm going to combine like terms and replace my I squared all in the same step. So I'm going to have 12, a 4i, and a 30i. A negative 4i and a 30i is going to be a positive 26i minus 10 times negative 1 all over. Again, we remember with those conjugate pairs that center term should disappear. So a negative 3 and a positive 3i minus a negative 1. So I have 12. A negative 10 and a negative 1 is a positive 10 plus 26i all over 9 minus a negative 1 is 10. So then I'm going to have 12 plus 10 is 22 plus 26i over 10. Again, we're trying to achieve that a plus bi form, so I'm going to break it apart. 22 over 10 plus 26 over 10i. And I need to simplify, so I'm going to reduce by a factor of 2. This you can put in your calculator, math enter if you need to. 11 over 5 plus 13 over 5i. Okay? And our last one, same setup. Okay, same kind of problem, binomial on the bottom, so I'm going to multiply by the conjugate. Now the conjugate is negative 1 plus 4i. Now notice the center sign is the only one that changes. This is always the type of problem that confuses students. But you have to remember, in our conjugate, and in none of the conjugates we've done before, did we flip our sign. It was a positive 3, positive 3. We had a positive 1, positive 1. So don't let the negative mess up your process. We only change the center sign. Okay, so we're going to do distributive property. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. 5 times 4i is plus 20i. Negative 8i times negative 1 is positive 8i. And negative 8i times 4i is negative 32i squared, all over negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. Negative 1 times 4i is negative 4i. Negative 4i times negative 1 is positive 4i. And negative 4i times negative 4i is negative 16i squared. Now this part right here should clue you in if you didn't get the conjugate right. Because if you didn't do the correct conjugate, these two center terms will not disappear. And that should clue you in to you have done something wrong. The conjugate is not correct. Okay? So, again, we're going to combine those I terms and replace our I squared with negative 1 in the same step. So I'm going to have negative 5. 20i plus 8i is 28i minus 32 times negative 1 all over. So we have 1, and these two center terms, positive 4i, negative 4i, go to 0, minus 16 times negative 1. So then we have some cleanup. I have negative 5. So I have negative 32 times a negative 1 is a positive 32 plus 28i over 1 minus 16 times negative 1 would be 1 plus 16, which is 17. Okay, so then I have 32 minus 5 is 27 plus 28i over 17. And again, remember, we're trying to achieve that a plus bi form. So I have 27 over 17 plus 28 over 17i. And that is our final answer.